One of the things I think we get wrong in our society is that we're more afraid of physical harm than moral harm. And I think that the idea that, one, we want to save the woman is right, but also that, like, when this man hurts other people, he is also hurting himself. And so we should stop him, not just because it's the right thing to do for those other people, but it's right for him too.
Welcome to The Neutral Ground. This week, I've got a very special guest, PJ Wehry of the Wehry Dads podcast and Chasing Leviathan. PJ is actually my first encore guest, and I'm excited to talk with him about philosophy, life, and everything else that falls in between. In this episode, PJ and I discuss the importance of mentoring young men, we talk about married life, and we discuss why we seem so reluctant to help others today through a rather disturbing video that popped up on my YouTube feed involving a young man on the subway. Now, despite the seriousness of that video, something you're going to realize right away is that PJ and I love to laugh. We get a bit silly in this episode, and I hope we take you along with us for the ride. Now, before you go all Mad Hatter on us, make sure to hit that subscribe/follow button. And if we make you think or smile, consider leaving a kind comment and/or rating where applicable. Remember, every little bit feeds the algorithmic gods. Finally, I highly recommend that if you have not checked out Wehry Dads podcast and Chasing Leviathan, you do so as soon as possible. Preferably after you've finished listening to this entire episode. You can find the links to those podcasts in the episode notes below. I hope you enjoy my conversation with PJ Wehry. PJ, welcome to The Neutral Ground. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for asking.
Let me first say this. You are my first repeat guest.
I did not know that.
You are officially...
I feel very honored. Yeah, thank you.
You are officially, I'm giving you a title for repeat guests. You're the first one, and you get the title of Friend of the Show.
Oh.
So you are officially a friend of the show. And if you come on one more time, you get a free sandwich. That's it. That's all you get from me. You get a free sandwich.
I'm a foodie, so that sounds like a good day. I'm not going to lie.
So
awesome.
So thank you for coming on again.
Yes, absolutely.
And we have quite a lot to talk about here. And I like these opportunities with you because I think we both of our audiences can get to know a little bit more about us, even about where we stand on certain things, because this is really going to be a lot like a conversation more than anything else, more than focused on any particular, book or idea. And so I'm really looking forward to this. Now, you are the host of two fantastic podcasts. One is Chasing Leviathan, which people can see right behind you. But you also have one called Wehry Dads, and that's Wehry as in Wehry.
Yes.
Right? A play on your last name.
Yes.
My wife thought that was the greatest title ever invented.
I'm glad she liked it.
She thought it was, so wonderful. And I love it too. I think it's fantastic. And although we kind of met through Chasing Leviathan, I'd actually like to begin by asking you about Wehry Dads with your father, Pete.
Yes.
What prompted you to start the Wehry Dads podcast?
First off, thanks for asking. And the Wehry Dads part, it definitely felt right to do because it is a dad show. So why not have a dad joke in the title? So I just wanted to address that side of it. Starting that for me, when I create, I create podcasts all the time. I have moved into podcast consulting, so this is becoming more and more common. I think it's important to start with an internal motivation and an external motivation. So everybody wants, to do the Joe Rogan thing and make $100 million for their podcast. Probably no one will ever do that again. Maybe there'll be like 2 or 3, right? Like maybe far in the future. Like this is not how that works. But you can make a living doing this. And that is kind of the end goal. With the way life is shaping up for me right now, I don't have the time to put into it other than to keep it rolling. But I think the important side, there's years before you get to that point. There's years of getting up and it's a grind and you have to work really hard. And so for me, when I looked at Wehry Dads, I was like, what is going to make me get up every morning? Because the promise of pay down the road, maybe, is not going to help me get up in the morning. And that's generally speaking, not a great reason to get up in the morning for anything. If the only reason you get up for your job in the morning is because I have to get paid, it's going to start to wear on you. And we see that. I mean, I can't tell you how often I've seen disgruntled, frustrated men who have spent 40 years and, they can't wait to get out of their job. And they're counting down 10 years, like, just 10 years till I retire. And that just that's not what I want for my life. So the internal motivation, the internal purpose for Wehry Dads really is twofold. And I guess this kind of feeds into the external purpose. My dad has been mentoring young men. That's really been his job, both as a coach and as a youth pastor. He worked at a college in the student life department, largely mentoring students. He's always mentored young men. And so he's been doing that for like 40 years. And I was looking at, as he kind of progressed, he travels a lot right now, but I think, he's 60 and it's going to start slowing down a little bit. I was trying to find a way for him to continue that work in a way that was not so demanding. And just to, he has this expertise. But the other thing that was just so important to me, I was like, if nothing else happens, if I create this podcast and we record several years of it, let's say we go 5 years, it's not going anywhere. I will have 5 years of recorded advice and thoughts on manhood, mentoring, and maturity. That's the byline, the tagline for Wehry Dads. To give to my sons, to give to my grandsons and great-grandsons, and moving forward. And that's actually priceless. And so whatever work I put into it, I know I'm going to get something in return. And even, no one looks forward to the death of their father, but I know that at some point my dad's going to pass away. Most likely it will be before I do. And I will have, this experience of doing it with him, which I did not realize just how sweet that would be. And, that's not something you normally talk about between two guys. Like, oh, it's just a sweet time. It's so tender. But it has definitely been that. I mean, it's been incredible. Like, we already had a good relationship, but as we live in this multi-generational house and we come up together to the studio and we just talk about what matters as a man, that's been unbelievable. And so then I can go back and listen to these, that's like, these are memories I will have recorded with my dad, which is good because we do not like pictures. So this seems talking, we're New Englanders. So the talking is more our speed, and we don't mind recording that. But we are both pretty famous for photobombing attempts at capturing portraits. So this way we will have some memories that aren't just us making goofy faces. If anyone looks at our podcast, you'll see the cover for the podcast, the faces we're making. People are like, oh, that was such a great idea to like show your charisma and like you're like how funny you are. And I'm like, no, that's the best picture my wife could find when she was designing the cover. So
That's awesome.
yeah. So that's really where it came from. Like when, and I think even in the email you sent, you were asked about, did I see something missing in the culture? And I think you could always say yes. There's always something missing in the culture, even when there are acceptable answers to that lack. I don't see my dad and I with Wehry Dads like being like this kind of savior show. Like, we are going to fix manhood in America. Even when you look at podcasting, even if you get somewhere in like 50,000 listeners, which is a lot of listeners for a podcast, that'd be a lot. That's a very small audience, really, when you look at the size of the United States, when you look at the size of the world. And so what I'm really trying to create is a community of people who are listening and that we can interact with, in different ways. Eventually, we want to roll out some kind of social presence where we can interact more with people who are listening, and just creating it's not so much about creating content that's going to revolutionize the world as it is going to bless people and mentor people, disciple people in this kind of I wouldn't say 50,000 small, right? But like it's in a meaningful way. And so I don't think aiming to be Joe Rogan or not Howard Stern obviously wouldn't fit the but like I'm going to become famous, right? I'm going to be Jimmy Kimmel or Noam Chomsky or Jordan Peterson, like these guys who like just have swallowed up YouTube, right? Like I didn't go out looking for Jordan Peterson clips. They just like showed up. It's like, you're a man. Like literally like YouTube, like there's certain things it's like, you must like Jordan Peterson. You must like Joe Rogan. And as soon as you click on one, it just feeds you tons, right? And so I didn't start out looking for any of this stuff, and so I looking for that kind of I wouldn't say omnipresence, but close, like where like you dominate the algorithm. That's something that comes from having good content, but it doesn't come, it's not something that comes to you automatically. That's oftentimes there are other factors that happen that take your good content and elevate it, right? There's a certain moment, there's a certain moment of like you go viral in a huge way, and then you get discovered by everybody. And I think that isn't something that you can control. But what I can control is building up, as much as I can control anything, is I can build up solid content that blesses people, and I can look to bless a certain number of people. And that's something that I think. So that's a pretty long answer. So I don't need to keep going. But what are your thoughts on that?
No, it's a good one, and I'd actually, you are incredibly blessed to have your father right there giving the advice that he does, and it's phenomenal advice. In some ways, the beauty of it is in its kind of pragmatism. It's very useful stuff. It's not something that anyone has to necessarily decode. He says it, you think about it, and then you go do it.
Yeah.
You go try it. And my question to you would be this: now that you've been working with him in this podcast setting, let's say, and thinking about the importance of mentoring, especially mentoring young men, if you had to narrow it down, and this is an unfair question, I'm telling you up front.
No, yeah.
If you had to narrow it down, what would be one particular trait you think in the young men of today that could use more mentoring from older, let's say, men to help out? Is there one particular trait that comes up kind of constantly in your discussions with your father?
I don't know if it's a trait per se. I know it's something my dad's really good at, and it's what comes to mind. That you can give when you're mentoring another young man. And I will say you can give this to young ladies, but I think it's often slightly different because of cultural and social pressures. Generally, men are expected to be strong and not to share as much. And that, like, I understand this is a generalization, but I definitely think that it's there for a reason, right? Like that definitely happens to a lot of men. I've been blessed with parents that listen to me, and but I think to give someone something is to give them that idea of like, you are loved and you are seen, and I am here on this journey with you. And I think a lot of young men don't have that. I think a lot of young men are expected to just grow into this role without this connection. And I don't think that's fair to ask from young men, right? I don't think that's fair to ask of any child, right? Like you have to have that connection, and that's something that I think in the past, before like the Industrial Revolution, and for your audience to understand, one of the things I think that's cool about Wehry Dads is that my background's in philosophy, and I go way too deep, and then my dad is just really good at practical wisdom after decades. So yeah, we might talk about the Industrial Revolution but that will be me bringing it up. So like, this is not a taste of Wehry Dads per se. But when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, before that, you were on the farm with your parents all the time. And it was very clear how everything connected. And you might have, and there were problems with this, right? Where like sometimes if it wasn't working in the family, you were all way too close, right? But when it worked, you were kind of guaranteed this connection. But when you look at our current setup, and this isn't to say that connection doesn't happen, but the current setup for most people is they go like in America is that you have kids, they go to school and they come back, and parents go to work and they come back, and it's during the time when they should be resting and they're tired after the day that they interact. And if there is a problem for you to solve together, it's often a problem that is extra, right? It's like, why is this not working at school? Why are you getting in trouble at school? Instead of fixing and creating together, like in a farming situation. And this isn't to valorize farming. Like, it's been really incredible what it's done for our marriage. And it's been very hard for my wife and I to work on the business together. We create stuff together. And that has made our marriage blossom, but it was a lot of work, right? So it doesn't have to be farming. I'm just saying that's what it used to be. And now everyone goes off and does their own separate thing. And then they come back. And then, I mean, after I've been working till 5, my first thought isn't, oh man, I'm going to go spend 3 hours with my kids, right? Like, well, partly because I homeschool them, so I'm definitely not looking to do another 3 hours with them. But, but like for parents, often all the times it's like, a good parent in today's society is someone who goes and spends half an hour of intentional time with their kids a day. And you will create connection that way, but it's just different. It's not going to be the same amount. And so to have somebody, and it's not fair, and this happens to kids in school, it's not fair to ask teachers to connect with every kid. They have 20 kids in a classroom, and that's a good school. Some schools are like 25, 30. You cannot connect with 25 to 30 kids in the way that they need. And so I think this idea of connection is just very, very important. This idea of, and I've been kind of meditating on this idea of practical wisdom, which is there is no substitute for dealing with the particulars of a situation. And of course, my background's in philosophical hermeneutics, so I'm going to be very attentive to like the individual situation and how to interpret. But that comes out in practical problem solving, and it's very obviously missing with a lot of today's kids. That the practical problem solving often happens apart from them. So teachers are often looking at like classroom management. They're not looking at a specific kid. And so a lot of times kids get shunted into boxes because they have to solve the problem in only a certain amount of time. Because to really sit down and deal with an individual person and how they should best grow is a laborious task. And so I think for me, that idea of, as a mentor, taking the time to apply practical wisdom where it's not just time, it's the concentration during that time. To create that connection and that idea of, I am working with you to see, this is what I see, this is how I can help you, this is where you need to step up, that sort of thing.
What I really like about what you just said too is being mindful of the creation of moments to bond and build together. So many times I'll hear people say, oh, but it shouldn't be forced. It should be organic in this and that. And I'm thinking, I don't know if we have anything in our lives that are organic anymore,
Yeah.
What I'm thinking is, you made me think of this scenario. I could see a parent coming home from work and trying to think that they're going to do something good with the child, in which case it's like, let me talk with the child. Let me talk. And they talk, and then they try to solve a problem that happened. Well, it might be that in your mind, you're thinking you're doing something good, but it also might be that in the child's mind, this is coming across negative. So now these moments that you think you're constructing something positive, in actuality, you're building these sites of memory of negativity in the child.
Yeah.
As opposed to, in some sense, you want to build in some places where you're working towards something together that's not necessarily having anything to do with being better or doing better. You're just building time and memory together. And I can't tell you how many times I did that with my own father, even just random things. A game of catch, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
didn't solve any problems with a game of catch, but I remember those as being memories of positivity. And the more of those positive moments you can accumulate, I think the more that the child can deal with problematic conversations that have to happen, because it doesn't end up, they don't outweigh the overall scheme in their minds of connections, right? So that you could see every so often a child will say something like, why is it every time we talk it's about something negative?
Yeah.
And
Why are you always trying to
that's
fix
gotta
me?
hurt. Yeah, that's gotta hurt. And I would imagine, although I admit again, I'm not a father, but I have a great one.
Hmm.
And for any of the times that we got into our fights, I always knew he loves me and he's proud of me when I'm trying to do good. I mean, those two things mean everything to me.
Yeah.
And they continue even into being a 42-year-old man. I can still say those same things. And that doesn't mean that everything was wonderful. But we have that. And just to add a little bit of the science behind this, even as well, I mentioned to you before we started that I just got finished with an interview with two psychoanalysts, two doctors, and we were talking about the idea of how important it is for children to attach to the parents in a meaningful way, in a positive way. Although for them, it's a very nuanced word. It doesn't mean that they're always happy with you. It just
Yes.
means that they're stably connected to
Right.
you so that they know that you are there for them. And I thought about that after the conversation I had, and I started thinking about my own relationship, and I thought, yeah, that was everything. Even the times when we disliked each other as parents and children do sometimes. I never questioned that we were attached.
Yeah. Yeah. And even when you talk about like, and this is something my dad was really good at, when you talk about organic time spent together, I think one of the ways, and it's not necessarily, I understand that this is constructed in some way, but just letting them live life beside you. And so one thing that my dad would do is he would just have me go do his daily tasks, and it wouldn't take him outside of it with him. So for him, he was a coach. I would go with him even when I was little, and he was a soccer coach, so he would have to paint the lines at the field, and I would go with him, and I would be bored out of my mind. And, but I saw it. I saw what he was doing, and so much is gained by just seeing. As a kid, you just see things and you catch things. A lot of my own journey has become involved in cooking. I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, but I was on a path where I was going to try and get a PhD in philosophy, and I started struggling with depression, and I found out a lot of that was diet based, and so that led me kind of down this rabbit hole of food. And so now I do most of the cooking for our family. Ends up being for multi-generational. My grandparents live down the street, so I'm often cooking for like 8 to 10 people, right? And so my 4-year-old, who is far too adventurous, his name is Soren. Um, Soren Keats. I did saddle him with that name for the rest of his life. Poor kid. But he is he's very, he's a big boundary pusher. And it's not even, that gives the wrong impression. That gives the impression that he's rebellious. He's not. He is just he literally sang a song to my wife. He's like, it's a secret song. And he said, I want to go where I want to go, but don't die. but not die. And and that sounds to anyone listening, you're trying to understand the thought process on that. That is him to a T. We I don't want to devolve, I digress too far, but these stories are unbelievable. So we're on this nature boardwalk in our local town, and the boys had not seen an alligator yet. And we see one 20 feet away down in the lake. It's like 5-6 feet long. It's a full-grown alligator. I had to grab the back of Soren's shirt. He was over the boardwalk, and he was trying to get in the water with it. And, and I was just like, "What? What are you doing? Like, he will eat you, and you will die." And so. If you want to know where this is covered, he looked at me. He's like, "No, I will punch it, and then I will swim away really fast." And he's 4 years old. I'm just like, "No, no, you will not." And so he so clearly is just if I do not spend time with him, there's tons of disciplinary stuff that comes up because he has no wisdom as a 4-year-old, and he is constantly trying to do too much. He scaled our 7-foot privacy fences up into a fire escape when he was 3. Yes, like it never stops. He's always going, and so this has been a huge learning experience for me. Probably more for me than for him. And so doing things like allowing him to cook with me and really doing, not, I wouldn't say dangerous things, but like we worked with a knife and I held his hands and we like cut with the knife. And, I'm like, this is sharp. And like holding his hand over a hot pan and just like not in the pan, obviously, but getting him to understand this is hot and you are going to help me and you have to be careful. And so that is building in him like an understanding of like, oh, I can learn things that that are a lot, and he wants that. He's like, can I cook with you? Because for him, that's a grown-up thing to do. And so, just even as we're talking about all this, what I want to give him are moments alongside me where he's not a huge help when cooking, but in future, he will probably be pretty good at cooking, because he's gotten these basics down. He's just grown up around it. And his experience with me, it's not about, and I think this is part of the artificial nature sometimes. It's like after school, after work, you meet with your kid and you're like, I need to connect with my kid. And you sit down and they know it's a weird situation to sit down with someone like, I want to connect with you. You know what I mean? It's like, whereas if you're just doing something together, and they've done studies on this with some of the gender stuff where it's like they put boys in a room and girls in a room and seen how they interact. And girls generally, if they give them 2 chairs, like the girls will generally take the 2 chairs, turn them, and start talking to each other. If you put 2 boys, and I know this is a surprise to everybody, but if you put 2 boys in chairs, and whether this is cultural, whether like nature and nurture always plays a part in this stuff, right? It immediately becomes like they don't talk; they sit down either quietly if they're older, and next to each other. They don't look at each other, or they take it. The younger kids, of course, just turned them over and made them into airplanes, and we're like pushing them around the room, and like, like of course, right? But what they found was, and I've seen this. I actually, as I got older, I ended up working in the student life department along with my dad, and I had to work with some troubled college guys. And we've had some guys with some disciplinary issues. I would sit down with them, and I was supposed to meet with them weekly to see how they're doing. And surprise, guys who are having disciplinary issues don't want to sit down and talk with you for an hour. And so the first time was just painful. It was the worst. And so I got out dominoes, and I was like, look, let's just play some dominoes. And we played dominoes for 2 or 3 weeks. And then I couldn't get him to shut up. He just started talking and talking and talking. And after, I had left from working there, he came to visit me. He was like, hey, I'm in town. I'd love to visit you. And that's what they found with that experiment with the 2 boys, is that the most intimate thing that was shared, which is a little, there's always like, is it right for you to be listening on intimate conversations as researchers? But whatever. That's a whole other topic. The most intimate thing that was shared the entire experiment was between two like 12, 14-year-olds sitting side by side. They sat next to each other for about 15 minutes in complete silence. Then for after like they shared like two or three things, and then one guy just like blurted out, not blurted out, just like shared something like very, very intimate. And that's that idea of just sitting next to each other. And obviously, like personality plays into this. It's not just a gender thing. Some of that just comes from it being weary dads, right? And I'm a father to two boys, so I'm concerned about this stuff. But just creating this moment, creating these moments, is not something you can't create the moment. You can only create the space for that moment to happen. And so I think that's just a really important way to think about this.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Actually, that way, I agree with that. You try to set up as conducive of an environment as possible for something to happen, and then you be open to the moment if it does happen. And even if it doesn't, just the time that you're able to share with each other becomes a moment of its own in a really nice way. I definitely remember times just sitting in silence watching a baseball game with my dad, and those were equally wonderful. They felt like good moments for us, even though we didn't do anything, honestly, just watch a game. Well, I definitely encourage people to check that out. Check out your podcast there, and I want to move a little bit because you mentioned space, and I want to talk about
Sure.
space and people a little bit here, and move into the chasing Leviathan portion a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I showed you a video. I gave you a link to a video, and you watched it, and it's a rather disturbing video.
Yes.
And both of us deal in a lot of philosophy, and we're trying to figure out at the source of philosophy is how the human being is human and what it even means to be human in some ways. And the interesting thing about the pursuit and the study of philosophy is sometimes you see it in action. You see a moment in action, and you try to source a philosopher to figure out what's going on. And I will openly admit to you, in this situation with this particular video,
Mm-hmm.
I got nothing. I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
sat there in awe. And just to give the audience a little bit of context here, it's a video of a gentleman on a New York City subway, and he's clearly not well. And he's screaming and he's yelling, and there's quite a few people on the subway car with him.
Yeah.
And at one point, he sits down next to two women, and when the two women get up to try to leave, he grabs one of them by the hair and drags her down, and he's holding her down next to him by her hair. And at one point, this young lady just very quietly says, "Help me." And here is someone with a video camera videoing this. There are people all around still staring at this moment. And I'll just say my initial reaction, then I'll ask you for yours. My initial reaction was horror. I was absolutely horrified at what was happening. And as I told you, I'm not trying to say in some way that I would be a Superman and I'm going to go run over and I'm going to save the day in that way. It wasn't so much that as much as my thought had to do with how we have changed as a people in some ways, as a species. You could make the argument, and evolutionary biologists have, and anthropologists, that we are where we are in the food chain because of our cooperation, our ability to hunt as a group larger animals.
Hmm.
But what I saw on that video was the complete opposite. I saw a herd of prey animals staring at this moment, this scene, and watching as a predator had one of their own in its grasps, and everybody else just watched because they knew, well, it's not me. So this predator has been satiated, and we can just kind of stand here and watch. And that filled me with absolute terror.
Mm.
So I'll ask you, and then we'll talk just a little bit about it from the standpoint of the cultural perspective here of humanity. What was your reaction to that video? What did you think?
There were two things that came to mind for me, and I guess three things. There's I don't want to miss the human situation there, which is the emotions that I feel and that I think are proper to feel with that sort of situation. When you see that the whatever empathy I can express to that young lady, like I she is a person, and she has. Um, I don't think it's good to talk in mathematical terms about this sort of thing, but she has a rich inner life just as I do, right? So, and I think that's one of the most important things that we can teach to our children, and that we can learn ourselves, right? And that we can express to other people, is that the other person has just a rich of an internal life as you do, right? And so I don't want her to become like this object lesson, right? Yeah, and that's what distinguishes this situation from the herd, right? Because I think there are some ethical implications for humans that aren't with hopefully with like some gazelle and a tiger, right? Um, and so I don't want to miss that. That I don't know that I need to apologize, but there is that, and I don't want to pity her, but I also want to express like some solidarity with her, and like she's a real person, and that was, I'm sure, very traumatic, right? That's scary, at the very least, right? Um, and then and I don't know what's wrong with the man, and so again, yeah, more and more, like as our society just invests in social media, and we like, the more I learn about it, the more I am very cautious when dealing with these scenarios. It doesn't mean I won't deal with them. It's just I'm just very cautious of it. I as a digital marketer, a lot has been like just clearly demonstrated to my eyes, right? Like you look at, it's become very much a fad to give money to homeless people and then record them, like, and and people are like, oh, and all the comments are people, that's so nice you gave money to a homeless person. And then the video has like millions of views, and they make back more than the money, and it's just an investment, right? An investment based on often that homeless person crying, them being just like they're overwhelmed, and capturing that on camera and demanding that for empathy from the audience to share the video so that you can make money. So I just want to kind of talk around the phenomenon that we're looking at here, which does play into why video this. Do you know what I mean? It's like, so like, why not intercede? Why video? Well, there's clear profit, and we do live in a society that is consumed with that. Not necessarily value, but I would say the perception of value is more important than value in our current system. Which is hard to actually target value, like, right? Like, but that's a whole other discussion. So in this case, he gets a really interesting video, and that has become incredibly valuable in our current system. So just wanted to talk about the situation of that, and make sure that we think that these are two human beings, and everyone around are human beings. And so then when we look at things like the other two sides of it, I'd want to look at is, I've just been kind of, I wouldn't say maybe confronted as a little bit, that mental health in many countries outside of the West is seen as a communal problem, not an individual problem. And so when you see something like this happening, like, people are like, oh, that guy has a problem, instead of like, we have a problem. And some of this is just the dissolution of community in any case, right? Like, that we are very individualistic over here, and so we solve our own problems, and maybe we have some friends who help us, right? If we're lucky. And so when you look at, and I think, especially in terms of mental health, one, I think that exacerbates mental health problems to make people feel alone, right? But also we know this is a great example of, it's damaging to the community when someone has mental health problems. It is a community problem. It's an individual problem, but the parts and the whole play in together. And so, I mean, this is a great example of that. And then this comes from the great philosopher David Wong, who people may know from John Dies at the End and other, great works of fiction. No, it's actually pretty trashy fiction, but I really enjoy it. But he mentioned something that I don't know the particular science behind it, but I think the general idea holds true, and I think it's intuitive. Uh, he was talking about tribalism. He often talks a lot about the breakdown of modern society, et cetera, and kind of how irrationality kind of peeks at the cracks inside in our current structure, right? And so one of the things he mentioned is the idea of the Dunbar number, which I was not familiar with, and I looked it up on Wikipedia. So just so you know where my source for all of this is, but it was so intuitive and made so much sense to me, and I've seen it that I was like, I'm going to like this is like embedded in my mind, right? That the average human being can only really make, and it's not an exact number, but the average human being can only really make 150 real connections to other people. That it takes a certain amount of cognitive power to connect to somebody, right? Like it takes time and you have to like use your imagination to really connect with other people. Like outside of that, generally people treat other people as objects, right? Like I don't think, and I'm not capable of addressing everyone in China as a human being. I think of like there's China and there's Chinese, and that is an abstract object in my head, and there's no getting around that. I can't I can't connect with billions of people on a personal level. Like my brain can't handle that. But what happens is that when people become objects, one of the classic things, or like one of the easy things that have happened, is you lose empathy. And so I mentioned earlier that I wanted to, talk about. I'm in Central Florida now, rural Central Florida. We kind of moved a little bit out of Orlando, and this I don't think this would play out the same way in Central Florida, in rural Central Florida. And part of that is in New York, you have so many people that everybody becomes an object. Because if I stop and help somebody here in one of the towns that I live next to, I'll probably see that person again. In New York, there is no, like, these are all fleeting connections. And so to say, hey, I don't really know this person, but if I help them, I know they're in my community, which is small enough for me to really enter into, is completely different from somewhere in New York where if I interfere with this and I get called into the police station, or I get called into, or I have to go to the hospital, I'm going to lose hours and hours and hours over a fleeting connection that I will never connect. Like I'll never connect with this person again, either the man or the woman in this case. And so what happens is they become objects. And so that's where I think that's the underlying phenomenon of like, I'm glad it wasn't me, which we've seen multiple times in New York, like with different studies of certain situations where people get stabbed in the street. And we know that the neighbors saw it from all the different apartment windows, but nobody even calls the police because they'll have to give a report, right? They're like, somebody else will do it. And it's not worth my time because that person is really an object to me. And so I think like there's an abstract ethical duty that I think is right, that we should interfere in these situations. But most people don't follow through on abstract ethics. They follow through on gut kind of herd mentality, like that kind of like, the idea that most people make their decisions based on their emotions, right? That's something that I think is, you're not going to connect. You can't connect on that sort of level with millions of people in New York.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point about viewing people as merely objects and even fleeting connections within your own narrative, your own story that you're creating. And because you don't want this narrative to be a part of your story, you'll essentially deny what's right in front of you, what's happening right in front of your eyes. The my mind immediately, when I first viewed it, it immediately went to an animalistic kind of vision. Because if you watch the video, there is this sense that all standards of humanity have been completely removed. And I like the fact that you brought up the idea of mental health as a communal problem, because there's I think a good strong argument to be made that if people in that car could have said, let's the four of us, let's go
Right.
over and let's help the woman first and foremost, help the
Right.
woman release so that she could leave, but at the same time, let's try to hold him where he is so that he can get the help that he needs. We've got to get somebody here who can get him help, because
Right.
we shouldn't. I don't think I'm wrong, and I don't feel wrong in saying that my heart first goes out to the woman.
Yeah.
You have to provide a safe situation there first, a safe environment. And so I would immediately say we've got to go over to for her to be released. But then I do think, like I said, there's a good argument to be made. We've got to worry about him now too,
Yeah.
because we don't want to see another human being struggling in that way. We shouldn't want to. We should want him to feel like he is meaningful, that he's important, that he has every right to give something great to humanity. But somebody perhaps has to step in and give him that opportunity. But it's got to be through a safe environment. It has to be. And
Mm.
if that means four of us jump on top of him and hold him down for his own safety, there'll probably be some people who disagree with that, but I'm going to stand by that. I am.
Yeah, I do think there's something. I think it is right to stand by first victims, right? True victims. Uh, it's interesting to see how the fallout from the Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing will play out. But standing by people who really are victims, that I think is the right instinct. So when we talk about, in this case, the woman, like, she needs to be made safe, and but then to look, and I take a very Socratic view of a lot of the morality kind of stuff, and obviously mediated through Plato, because he's the one writing everything. But one of the things I think we get wrong in our society is that we're more afraid of physical harm than moral harm. And I think that the idea that one, we want to save the woman is right, but also that, like, when this man hurts other people, he is also hurting himself, and so we should stop him, not just because it's the right thing to do for those other people, but it's right for him too. And I would agree. Like, the best way to do that, I am not I'm not a psychologist, psychiatrist, or like any kind of expert on tactical suppression of people in subways. So I generally, for me, that is very much a case of practical wisdom. You know what I mean? Uh, my mind goes to, like, dogpiling on him with three other guys, but that's because I don't I don't know how you fight in the subway. I don't know how to fight. I've never taken martial arts, and I
That
don't.
was my minor.
So
My minor in college was subway fighting.
yes, yeah, exactly. And I think that's where one of the things I think we've seen that's without getting into the weeds of it, I think everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people would agree with, is we've seen a need in police departments for more specialization on how to deal with. One thing that's been called for is, like, do I need do I need a police officer for a mental health disturbance? Yes, sometimes, but we also would be really good to have someone who understands what's going on with mental health, right? Like, and understand, I think there's been some stuff with, like, the way that police have had to interact with Autistic people obviously going to be very different from interacting with someone who is not autistic. And part of this is I have gotten to know someone in my neighborhood who's a police officer, and that's something he wants to do, is he wants to go on and get more degrees. And I think that that's a very healthy thing, is to have members of law enforcement, and there's all sorts of weeds here that I don't want to get into, but I think everyone can agree, like, that would be really healthy, right? Like, there is probably some way of being in this situation and dealing with the situation that would be better for the knowledge you have of either whether it's like recognizing that he's on drugs, or recognizing that he is mentally disturbed, or whatever is going on in the situation, because he obviously there is a problem. I don't know what that problem is. Some of that is because it's taken on a phone, but I don't know that I would know if I was even there. But I think it's very important that we develop capabilities in people. And when I say capability, I would say is the capacity for judgment in particular situations. And I think that the idea of practical wisdom is something I just keep coming back to, even as I look at something like this, because it's complicated, right? And so that's that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and just to kind of tie it up maybe a little bit, something that connects with research that I'm currently doing for my own work. I'm doing a lot of research on the effects of awe on us, on human beings, on the communal, on how we respond to a communal reaction of awe to a singular point, and how it can create incredibly strong bonds and uplift us in terms of our connections to humanity and connections with each other. And I think in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, is the reverse possible as well? Can you have an awful moment where you watch something like this video and it actually loosens the bonds that we feel between each other? And so, in some sense, I do believe that I felt that. I felt like I watched this and then I felt more disconnected to humanity. Now, I think everyone knows this is not the first negative video to be put up on the internet. There are quite a few of these. It's not all kittens anymore,
Right.
There are quite a few of these negative videos. Matter of fact, I do believe, I don't have the numbers, but I don't think anybody would call me out on it. Probably the majority of videos that we see on the internet are negative, and negative about humanity. And I do wonder what is the effect that is having on separating us from each other, on creating more distance between the individual and the community of humanity, so that we no longer really, like you said, we no longer even see the other people around us as human beings. We simply see them as objects. Now, interestingly enough, this actually happens in the Odyssey of all things, in the epic The Odyssey. Yes. And I think I brought this up the first time we talked. I'm having deja vu a little bit even, but I'm going to bring it up again because it actually fits.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. In the Odyssey, there's a character named Elpenor. And nobody talks about Elpenor, but I love him for this very reason. He's one of Odysseus's crew members, and I believe it's on Circe's island. He's drunk on the roof, and then he falls and breaks his neck. And nobody knows him. Nobody even knows that he's dead. And then you flash forward, and Odysseus is in the underworld, and he sees Elpenor, and he's like, "What are you doing here? Like, what's going on?" And Elpenor is like, "You have got to go back to Circe's island, and you've got to give me a proper burial. You left me there." And that moment, for some reason, the maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, when I reread the Odyssey, when I got to that moment, I just stopped, and I said, "Oh God, are there Elpenors in my life that I have simply left behind and looked at them as, well, you were there for a minute and then whatever, moved on?" And that has changed the way that I try to think about my interactions. Now, I can't always be cognizant of every interaction, always being meaningful to that level, but I do try to be a little bit better about thinking of people as more than Elpenors in my story of life.
It does sound like a pejorative, so I do like that. Like, oh, you're such an Elpenor. That's
Yes.
oh man, I have this obligation I have to like succeed in. It's like this such an Elpenor.
Dude's
I'm
an
definitely stealing
Elpenor.
that.
That
I'm gonna
guy's
use
an
it.
he's such an Elpenor. Like,
Oh man, I have to go back and bury this guy. Come on. No,
yes. Oh, jeez.
something as you're talking. One is when you talk about negative videos, whether there's more of them or not. I definitely think we just saw this in April. Facebook whistleblower comes out. Facebook has been intentionally putting negative content in front of people, knowing it would hurt them because it would keep them on the platform longer. Which I don't know there's a lot of different ways that could kind of trail off into this, but it's just like that's such a clear moment of what's happening on the internet. I think that's really I think that's useful to bring into this context. The other thing that I think is really important here, that idea of the awful and disconnecting you. They've done studies with marriages on the verge of divorce. And the number one indicator, correlation, right? When they asked people to say what kind of attitude they had to their partner, fear, anger, distrust. The number one thing that indicated whether you're going to get divorced or not was disgust.
Interesting. Why? Do you know why?
Disgusted. They were disgusted with their partner. They did not respect them anymore. And so even like, I think it kind of, for me, this seems, this was intuitive. So I think it kind of goes to like, let's put it this way. Let's put it in an Iliad and Odyssey sort of way. Elpenor was literally on Odysseus's team, and he was annoying, and he didn't get a burial. Hector was Achilles' rival, and he obviously disrespected the body, but then he gave it because he respected him. And in another life, Hector and Achilles would probably have been great friends. And I think we can see that, right? Like it's, there's that trope of like friends, in romantic movies, friends to lovers, or no, enemies to lovers, right? Like what you often see are these people who hate each other. And a lot of times it's because that they're so competitive, right? And so you can have in marriage, you can have moments where this is from years ago. I was kind of going through reading some marriage counseling books before my wife and I got married. And so you have like this competitive like tension, right? And as long as you respect the other person, it often like ends up working out. A certain thing happens and it can click really easily. But if you're disgusted with the other person, if you think they're a loser, that's really hard to come back from, right? Like
Yes.
that's yeah.
It's funny.
And
You just
go ahead.
You just brought something back. Sorry, that made me laugh. Toward the end of the semester, I was speaking with students, right? And for some reason, I don't remember why, it turned to this idea of like girlfriends and boyfriends and dating and all this stuff. Okay.
Right.
And they were talking.
It's college. Yes.
Yeah. One of them said, you want to be with someone who agrees with you a lot. And there was this pause, and I almost feel like this was a divine pause. God smacking me on the back of the head, saying, that's wrong. Tell them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did. I interrupted and I said, listen, I got to be honest with you. I'm going to tell you the truth. I know a lot of people say that, good marriages have people who believe all the same things and they get along on everything. But I said, you should have similar beliefs in your ethics and morals, where you're willing to be pushed and not pushed. That's sure, absolutely. But to me, one of the key things is a good spouse provides you with something that you didn't even know you needed.
Mm.
There are times when I thought, and I've always been, philosopher Joe, right? I'll figure this all out through philosophy, right? Even dating. And no, the answer is no. I didn't have anything figured out. Nothing. And when I started dating my wife, I quickly realized and things that she would push back on me, about she was right. And I was
Mm.
like, "Oh my god, I didn't even know that I was wrong in that area, or that I needed help, or that I could have done something a better way." And she still does that for me today. The same thing. She knows what is the best in me, and she holds me to that
Mm.
like no one else will. And that reminds me of Penelope and Odysseus at the end of the
Mm.
Odyssey. When she's asking him, she tries to trick him about the bed, and she says, tell the servant to bring the master's bed into the other room. And Odysseus is like, "What? You can't move my bed. It's built into a tree. Don't tell me that you're going to move my bed. That's impossible." And then Penelope knows this is him. Actually, it is
Right.
Odysseus finally. But all along, you've got that respect of these people as individuals, as powerful people. And I guess now I'm seeing your point about this idea of disgust, how that would be the case, that would lead to divorce.
Mm.
Well, I never thought that wouldn't be intuitive to me, I think, until you said that.
Oh, it wasn't intuitive to me until I heard it. Let me be clear. I wasn't like, oh, obviously it's going to be discussed. As soon as they said it, I was like, oh, yeah. Like if I just looked at someone like, I don't trust, like it goes beyond like distrust, right? Like we understand that redemptive thing where like someone, but to come back from being someone who is just not even worthy of your respect is just oof. Um, it's a similar thing. Kind of go along with this is they also did a study um, on whether people who fought more or didn't fight more got divorced more often, and they found that there was very little correlation. It mattered way more about communication. And so that idea of like, people are like, oh, if we just get along and it's just everything will just be fine, right? It's like a lot of times when if you get two really agreeable people, they won't fight at all and they just won't talk about it. And then they just slowly go like this and then they get divorced. So, uh, when you talk about this sort of thing, it's actually, people's initial response, is kind of that like just agree on everything. And it's like, no, it's actually better. Like, I mean, not necessarily better. It's not bad if you're that kind of people who like constantly fight and then constantly, you know, work through it and get as long as you're working through it and you come to agreement you're making up after, it's fine. And so, which was really helpful for me because I'll be honest, I'm like, I am. I'm like my wife and I like work through things a lot, right? Especially like as we started a business together, there was a lot of stuff where I was like, I'll just give this issue in our marriage time, and that doesn't work when you're in business together. Like, like we have to like this is a problem that like we've had in our marriage for a couple of years, and now it's becoming a problem with the client, and we're not going to get paid, and we're not going to have rent money. It's like all of a sudden like, well, baptism by fire. We're gonna have to work through this now, and so that's always been. I don't know. Maybe that's a little too TMI, but I just really. I don't mind sharing it. I think that was a lot of people are like, "How could you go into business with your wife?" And just like, uh, my respect for her has grown. I've seen what she can do, and I've seen where she very much complements my weaknesses. One of the last story and I'm done. But she was working on a website. That's what we do, digital marketing together. And she's like, I'm so glad to be done with all my meetings, everything, and just to be able to build this website. It feels so good to just do something repeatable and be paid for it. And I looked at her and I was like, and that's why we work together so well, because I would rather kill myself than just do something repeatable for money. give me lots of new challenges for money. Great. You know, like, but just to sit there and she's like, oh, finally something I know how to do. Like,
That's hysterical. Yeah,
and
it's similar.
That's that
It's
complimentary. Go ahead. Sorry.
no. You're right. And my wife and I both work in the same program at the same university. You know, we were across from each other in offices at the University of Arkansas when we were graduate students, and now we're about a 7-second walk to each other's offices as well. And every so often, someone will ask me, you know, how does it feel, you know, to work with your wife? Is it difficult? And I'm like, no, it's actually, I mean, it's easy because we talk,
Yeah.
we discuss things, you know, and sometimes we do have situations at work where the problem is in that middle zone. And I know you know what I'm talking about. It's in that middle zone of work and life. And it's like halfway the problem is life and like half of the problem is work. And so like one person might be arguing from the family perspective and the other one is arguing from the work perspective. And the real issue is the conversation has to be about how much do we need to attribute to this zone, right? Because if we could just figure out if we're actually talking about a work or a home thing, then I think the conversation is probably easier to actually have than we're making it.
Yes. I would actually, we're probably beyond zones now, and it's just one big heaping mess. like seriously, like it's just like, fortunately, we have great clients. We work a lot with keynote speakers, and they tend to be very gracious people. So, I mean, nothing like having a Zoom call, and my son is getting dressed, and then he zips by me in the process of getting dressed and runs naked into a Zoom meeting that my wife is having with the client. You know, like, this is like... I have learned painfully so that in the middle of a podcast, I have got to keep the door locked, or else, I mean, this is my 7-year-old is, he's the firstborn son. He's very responsible. He's incredible, Finnegan. And as you can guess, in all these cases, we are talking about my alligator chasing Soren Keats, you know, like, and so, literally, like for us, like the discipline of our children, right? Like, in all senses, like positive and negative, which I think is an important thing when we talk about kids. Feel like, oh, disciplining your kids is like, there's like a positive, just instruction side too. All that all of a sudden becomes very intimately connected with work. And so, yeah, like, I mean, maybe we just live in the middle zone, you know, we live in no man's land.
I like it. I like the idea. We'll just inhabit that third space and just stay there. Just live right there instead. Well, I'm tempted to end it there because I like the idea that we got a little silly, a little serious.
Yeah.
Little philosophical here and there. But that's what I love about it. That's what I love about these conversations is we get to just kind of talk about certain things and show a little bit more to our audience in ways that we may not be able to do with other guests as much. So, PJ, thank you so much for coming on the show. As always, it's always a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm incredibly grateful to be a friend of the show and your first repeat guest.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with PJ Wehry. I know I did. If you did enjoy it, consider checking out PJ's shows, Wehry Dads and Chasing Leviathan. Above all, remember, it's okay to laugh. It's okay to smile. Until next time, try to keep one foot firmly planted on neutral ground. And have a great day. And go make someone you care about laugh. Tell them a dad joke, or better yet, tell them a Wehry Dads joke.